On Answers for Living today, we want to begin a short series of messages asking the question, how do you have an abundant life? The world has been decaying since the introduction of sin. The world we live in is decaying at an incredibly rapid pace. This nation, a republic, a nation built on Judeo-Christian values, a nation that has given its citizens incredible freedoms and rights not experienced in any other nation. But those freedoms have become abused. Freedom of speech has led to an epidemic of pornography. It has led people to write books geared for 10-year-olds that are designed to indoctrinate those children to believe in that homosexuality, that bisexuality, that transgenderism, boys and girls using boys and girls locker rooms interchangeably is perfectly normal. We see the rapid decay in our government as the radical left tries to promote the new socialist agenda that springs from Karl Marx, who was a demon-possessed hater of God and a hater of Christianity. And we live in a culture where social media is censoring conservative Bible teaching. How do we live with joy and the Holy Spirit while we live in a rapidly decaying culture? Paul and Barnabas go into a city. They preach about Jesus, and many Jews and Gentiles trust in Jesus and are saved. But other Jews get upset and they oppose Paul and Barnabas and drive them out of the city. Instead of being discouraged or frustrated, it says they were filled with joy in the Holy Spirit, and they moved on to preach the gospel to Gentiles. How could they have had such abundant joy when they were just kicked out of a town for sharing Christ? Well, here's something to remember. Number one, always remember God's plan is bigger than our politics or our problems. I'm not saying our politics and our problems don't matter, because they really do. And they form and they shape much of our lives. But we need to bring truth into politics and truth into those problems. And we got to remember, no matter what happens in the political world, it's temporary because it's decaying. God's purpose and God's plan are eternal. Elections are important. This pandemic has been full of questions like, what are the real facts? I know what I hear, but I don't necessarily know. I don't know what your challenge is with your health. But all these things that we fight with and wrestle with are temporary. They will decay. So Paul marches out in his speech and he says, everything around you is decaying, but I want you to focus clearly on what is never decaying. God has formed from the very beginning his purpose. So focus on God's purpose, God's plan, God's power, God's promise, and his salvation for your life. His purpose has eternal benefits, and that'll always give you purpose for your life. So Paul's kicked out of a town. Paul was told never to come back, and he left filled with joy and with the Holy Spirit. Why? Because Paul knew God has a purpose and a plan that's eternal, and for us, that's where we start. God's purpose for us is our salvation, and our salvation is eternal.